In the middle of a live congressional hearing, one whispered insult from Karoline Leavitt changed everything. She thought no one would hear her mutter, "Go back to Africa," but the microphone was live and America was listening. Across the room, Jasmine Crockett didn't rise in anger, didn't shout back. She just sat still, her silence louder than any outrage. By the time the clip hit every screen in the country, it wasn't the insult people remembered. It was the grace that answered it. And what Jasmine did next? It shook the nation harder than any speech, any protest, or any apology could. The hearing room was heavy with late afternoon light, thick with exhaustion and silent frustration. 3 hours into a grueling session on federal education reforms, tempers were starting to crack along invisible fault lines. Papers shuffled, pens clicked, and the occasional sharp whisper sliced through the otherwise stuffy quiet. Karoline Leavitt sat poised behind her microphone, an unreadable expression carved across her young, polished face. She was the image of ambition, crisp blazer, steely eyes, and the confidence that only comes with years of public battles. A senior advisor on education policy, her voice carried weight, perhaps too much for a room already fragile with tension. Across from her, Representative Jasmine Crockett leaned back in her chair, arms crossed loosely, her blue blazer soft against the stiff leather seats. She had remained calm through most of the proceedings, choosing her words carefully, speaking only when necessary. There was power in her restraint, the kind of patience born not out of weakness, but hard-earned wisdom. The chair recognized Jasmine. "Representative Crockett, you have the floor." Jasmine adjusted the microphone and spoke clearly, her voice steady but with an edge that suggested she was done being polite. "So what you're suggesting," she said, her eyes locking onto Karoline's, "is that the struggles of underserved districts are simply a matter of low effort? That the playing field has always been level? That history, context, inequity, none of it matters?" The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They landed with precision. Karoline's fingers tightened slightly on her notes. She shifted in her seat, the leather squeaking beneath her, and crossed her arms tightly across her chest. The air between them thickened. "Standards have to be enforced across the board," Karoline snapped, her voice clipped, her patience worn thin. Jasmine raised an eyebrow, calm. "That's easy to say when the board was never built for everyone to stand on." Karoline scoffed, quiet but unmistakable. And then, without thinking, with a careless tilt of her head and a roll of her eyes, she muttered under her breath, "She should just go back to Africa." She thought it was quiet enough. She thought the microphone wouldn't catch it. But it did. Every speaker in the room picked up the words, clean and crisp. The words echoed, chilling and cutting through the room like a blade. There was a half second, a breath before the reaction, a sharp inhale from somewhere in the gallery, a low murmur, a cough from the back. Karoline didn't even realize it at first. She reached casually for her water bottle, trying to maintain her cold composure. But something in the air shifted. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She didn't stand. She didn't shout. She simply turned her head and looked directly at Karoline. And in that look, that calm, steady, devastating look, she spoke volumes. The chair cleared his throat nervously. Let's stay on topic, ladies." But the topic had already changed. C-SPAN's cameras, locked into their quiet orbit around the room, captured it all. The live feed caught every second. Karoline's mutter, Jasmine's reaction, the sudden heavy silence. It didn't take long. Within minutes, someone in the media pit had clipped the video. By the time the hearing recessed, it was already racing across social media platforms like wildfire. "Go back to Africa" trended within 30 minutes. But even before Karoline knew it had gone viral, Even before her phone buzzed so hard it nearly fell off the table, she knew something had shifted. She knew it by the look Jasmine gave her. Not a look of hatred, not even disappointment, a look of pity. And somehow that hurt more than any shouting match ever could have. Karoline gathered her papers slowly, mechanically, her mind spinning. She could already hear the whispers behind her as she left the room. Staffers, journalists, aides, their faces a mixture of a stunned disbelief and muted fury. In the hallway, her aide, a young man named Lucas, rushed to her side. "We've got to get ahead of this," he said urgently, glancing at the swarm of reporters gathering at the end of the corridor. "You have to say it was taken out of context." Karoline didn't answer. She stared straight ahead, her heart pounding in her ears. Out of context? She knew better. The words were hers, and they had found their way into the world, carried on a live mic, spoken in a moment of arrogance she couldn't take back. But deep down, beneath the fear, beneath the panic, something else stirred, something more powerful, something that would not be defined by a single moment's weakness. Karoline took a breath, deep, steadying, and walked forward. Because redemption doesn't begin when you're safe. It begins when you're exposed. And she was about to find out what kind of strength she truly carried. Outside the chamber, the world moved faster than Karoline could. By the time she reached the private staff hallway, the story had already broken into two camps, outrage and disbelief. Some called for her immediate resignation. Others demanded apologies, investigations, consequences. But strangely, the loudest voice was not from Jasmine Crockett. She had said nothing. No press conference, no angry tweet, no televised indignation. Instead, she remained silent, calm, steady. And that silence, it hit harder than any shouted condemnation. In coffee shops, senior centers, and veterans' halls across the country, Americans who had lived through decades of civil rights battles, of bitter cultural divides, watched the clip in disbelief. But it wasn't the insult that captured them. It was the restraint, the dignity, the unshakable calm in the face of humiliation. Older viewers, those who remembered lunch counter sit-ins, those who had marched when marches were dangerous, recognized it instantly. They knew the power in refusing to let anger define you. Karoline sat in a staff room, head bowed, Lucas pacing in front of her. "You have to put out a statement," Lucas insisted. "You have to deny it. Say it was taken out of context. Say anything." Karoline lifted her head slowly. "No," she said, her voice hoarse but firm. "Not this time." Lucas froze. "I said it," Karoline continued. "It was wrong." She stood, gathering what composure she had left. "If I want to be more than a footnote, if I want to be better than that moment, I have to own it." Lucas hesitated, then nodded, the fight leaving his shoulders. Meanwhile, the footage was being played on loop across every major network. Analysts dissected Karoline's expression, her tone, her body language. Yet the longer the clip ran, the more attention shifted not to Karoline, but to Jasmine. "This," one commentator said on a late-night panel, "is what strength looks like. No shouting, no storming out, no screaming headlines, just stillness. A quiet refusal to be defined by someone else's hatred." Back in her hotel room, Karoline stared out the window at the Capitol dome glowing in the distance. Her phone buzzed with calls she didn't answer, emails she couldn't face yet. But in her heart, a decision had already been made. Tomorrow she would speak, not to deny, not to excuse, not to spin, but to tell the truth. Because real leadership, the kind that lasts longer than a headline, isn't about winning every moment. It's about standing when you'd rather run. And Karoline Leavitt, for all her flaws, was about to find out if she was strong enough to do exactly that. The next morning, the sun rose over Washington with a heaviness that could be felt even through the thick marble walls of the Capitol. Karoline woke early. She hadn't really slept, just drifted in and out of a restless haze, her mind playing the hearing on a cruel loop. Her phone buzzed again. New headlines, new outrage, new opportunities to hide. But Karoline wasn't hiding. By 9 a.m., she stood behind a simple wooden podium in a quiet side room off the Capitol building. No cameras yet, just a few reporters, pens poised, waiting. Lucas handed her a bottle of water, his hand lingering for a second longer than necessary. "You sure?" he whispered. Karoline nodded. "I have to be." At exactly 9:05, the door opened wider and more reporters filtered in. Some skeptical, some curious, some openly hostile. Karoline didn't shrink. She adjusted the microphone, took a breath so deep it felt like it touched her spine, and began. "Yesterday," she said, "I said something that was wrong." The room hushed instantly. It was wrong not because it was caught, not because it embarrassed me. It was wrong because it betrayed the very values I claim to stand for. She paused, letting that land. America's greatness is built on the courage to admit when we failed. And yesterday, I failed. No paper in front of her, no lawyer-crafted statement, just her voice, raw and unshielded. To Representative Crockett, and to every American who felt the sting of those words, I am sorry. A flashbulb clicked. A pen scratched furiously against paper. And more than that, Karoline continued, I am committed to making sure my actions, not just my words, reflect the respect every citizen of this country deserves. Another breath. She looked out at the room, not as an aide, not as a political figure, but as a woman who had been humbled and who had chosen not to run from it. I will be stepping away from my advisory role temporarily to engage directly with the communities I've spoken about but failed to honor. Whispers now, reporters exchanging glances. This was unexpected. Karoline pressed on. Because redemption doesn't come from a microphone. It comes from showing up, from listening, from learning. She folded her hands lightly on the podium. That's all I have to say today. And with that, she stepped down. No shouting, no grand gestures, just truth, laid bare. As she exited the room, Lucas rushed to her side. You did it, he said, his voice tight with emotion. Karoline exhaled, the tension slipping from her shoulders for the first time in days. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew, with a certainty she hadn't felt in a long time, that she had chosen the harder path. And sometimes the hardest path is the one that leads you home. Out on the Capitol steps, a few members of the public waited. An older woman, hair silver in the morning light, held a small American flag in one hand. She caught Karoline's eye and nodded once, slow and sure. Karoline nodded back, the smallest of smiles breaking across her face. Because sometimes redemption doesn't come in a roar. Sometimes it comes in a whisper. The hours after Karoline's press conference were unlike anything Washington had seen in months. The usual swarm of talking heads flooded cable news, but this time they were divided. Some attacked, spinning outrage. Others, more thoughtful voices, many older ones, saw something different. They saw a rare thing, humility. Karoline's words, spoken simply without blame, without excuses, touched a nerve beyond political lines. It wasn't about parties anymore. It was about accountability. Across America, living rooms that usually kept the news on low turned the volume up. Veterans' halls, Bible study groups, local diners. People watched Karoline not because she had fallen, but because she was standing again, this time stronger and somehow more real. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett remained silent. The country buzzed, waiting. And then, 3 days later, she made her move. The setting wasn't a rally or a high-profile press event. It was a simple town hall meeting in her district, packed with voters, the kind who still believed that leadership wasn't about fame, but about service. No fancy backdrop, just a worn American flag on the wall. Jasmine took the stage quietly, holding nothing but a single piece of paper. She didn't read from it. Instead, she spoke from the heart. "Last week, something ugly was said," Jasmine began, her voice firm but gentle. "It wasn't the first time I've heard words like that. It won't be the last." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "But what matters more than the words," she continued, "is what we do after they're spoken." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. "I watched someone, Karoline Leavitt, do something that few people have the courage to do anymore." People leaned in closer. She owned her mistake. She faced it. She stood up when she could have stayed silent. Gasps in the audience. Someone clapped, just once, then more joined in. Jasmine held up a hand. "That doesn't erase what happened, but it matters. It shows that America isn't built on people who never fail." Her voice deepened, rich with the kind of strength that comes from scars, not armor. "It's built on people who fall and then choose to rise better than they were." Across the nation, clips of Jasmine's town hall flooded screens. But the moment that stuck, the one that made grandparents forward it to their grandkids, that made veterans nod slowly over black coffee, wasn't a soundbite. It was the sight of two women, different, imperfect, choosing grace instead of bitterness. And for many older Americans who had watched this country weather storms of division, it felt like a glimmer of the America they still believed in. In that moment, Karoline's redemption wasn't just about her anymore. It was about all of us. A reminder that dignity isn't weakness, that true strength comes not from never stumbling, but from having the courage to stand again, stronger and better. The ripples from that moment didn't fade. They deepened. Across America, something rare took hold, an uneasy, tentative kind of hope, not because people agreed on every issue, not because wounds had been healed overnight, but because they had seen two public figures model what so many had forgotten: grace. Karoline Leavitt returned to her work slowly but steadily, not with grand re-entrances or self-congratulation, but with quiet determination. She met with civic groups, spoke in town halls, visited schools, many in communities she had once overlooked. And each time she didn't open with a policy point or a slogan. She opened with listening. "I'm not here today to talk at you," she said once at a small church gathering in Birmingham. "I'm here to listen, because I learned the hard way that leadership starts with hearing the people you serve." The crowd, mostly older, nodded. Some smiled. Some simply watched, weighing her carefully, but seeing something different now. Meanwhile, Jasmine and Karoline's story found its way into classrooms, Sunday sermons, kitchen table conversations. It wasn't just about race or politics or scandal anymore. It was about character. It was about what kind of country we wanted to be and what kind of people we were willing to become to get there. Weeks later, Karoline and Jasmine crossed paths again. It was at a bipartisan leadership summit, small, private, away from the lights. No cameras, no grandstanding, just a conference table, coffee cups, and two women sitting across from one another. Jasmine extended her hand first. Karoline shook it firmly. "We're never going to agree on everything," Jasmine said with a small smile. "Probably not," Karoline replied, matching the smile. "But," Jasmine added, "we can agree on how we treat each other." Karoline nodded. "And on the America we want to leave behind." No further words were needed. The handshake said it all. And somewhere deep in the heart of the country, in small towns and big cities and places left off maps and headlines, people saw it. and believed a little more. Because redemption isn't a speech. It isn't a viral clip. It's the hard, unseen work of building trust again. One moment, one hand extended, one silent promise kept at a time. Karoline Leavitt didn't erase her mistake. She grew from it. She walked back into the public square, not as a perfect figure, but as a better one. And that's the America so many older viewers, so many citizens of every generation still dream about. Not an America of perfection, an America of second chances, of dignity, of quiet strength. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the kind of leadership you still believe in, share it. Because sometimes the greatest victories aren't the ones won in shouting matches. They're the ones claimed in silence and in grace. And that's where the real strength of a nation lives, in the hearts of those who refuse to give up on each other, even after the microphones go silent. Thank you for believing in the power of redemption. Hit subscribe for more stories that restore faith in our future.